I picked up my phone absent-mindedly, expecting nothing more than the usual flood of notifications, shopping deals, unread emails, and messages from the group chat that I barely participated in. But then, I saw it. A photo. At first, it didn't make sense. The image on my screen was of me, taken from across the street, blurry but unmistakable. My heart kicked against my ribs as I stared at it, my mind racing. Who took this? Why? Before I could process the shock, my eyes dropped to the message below. "You look beautiful. If only he knew." A wave of heat surged through my body, followed immediately by a cold, creeping dread. My fingers felt numb as they hovered over the screen, debating whether to respond, delete, or pretend I never saw it. But there was no pretending. My name was written all over this moment. I swallowed hard. The number was familiar. Too familiar. It belonged to my husband's best friend. The air in the house suddenly felt too thick. My pulse was hammering in my ears, making everything else, every sound, every background noise, fade away. This wasn't some anonymous message from a stranger, an accidental wrong number. This was intentional, deliberate. And worst of all, I didn't hate it. That realization struck deeper than the message itself. The logical part of my mind told me to shut this down immediately, to tell my husband, to confront his friend and demand an explanation. But another part of me, the part I didn't want to acknowledge, was intrigued. I had known him for years. He had been a part of our lives long before I even married my husband. I always saw him as my husband's shadow, the ever-present best friend who made himself at home in our lives. So why was he looking at me like this now? I exhaled sharply and locked my phone, tossing it onto the couch as if I could physically distance myself from what just happened. But the moment was already inside my head. I could still see the words burned into my memory. If only he knew. Knew what? That his best friend thought I was beautiful? That he had been watching me when I wasn't looking? That there was something unspoken lingering in the air between us? I shook my head. This was nothing. Just an inappropriate message, a bad joke, a misunderstanding. And yet, a flicker of something unfamiliar stirred inside me. It wasn't just shock. It wasn't just discomfort. It was something more dangerous. Curiosity. I told myself I wouldn't respond. I would delete the message, ignore it, pretend it never happened. But my phone buzzed again. Another message. "You don't have to reply. I just wanted you to know." I stood there, staring at the screen, feeling the weight of something shift in my chest. I told myself that this was the moment to walk away, to forget, to protect everything I had built. But instead, I did the one thing I shouldn't have done. I hesitated. And in that hesitation, a door opened, one I wasn't sure I could close again. I didn't answer the message. I wanted to believe that ignoring it would erase it from my mind, that by pretending it never happened, it would lose its power over me. But no matter how hard I tried to push it away, it lingered, gnawing at the edges of my thoughts. The next morning felt normal. My husband kissed me on the cheek before work. Coffee brewed in the kitchen, and the air smelled of routine. I tried to focus on the little things, the sound of the fridge humming, the feel of warm ceramic in my hands. But my mind kept wandering. I checked my phone 3 times before finally throwing it on the counter in frustration. It shouldn't have mattered. I told myself it was nothing, just a moment of curiosity, a fleeting thought that meant less than a passing dream. But it wasn't just the message that haunted me. It was the way I had felt when I read it, the way my pulse had spiked, the way my stomach had fluttered in a way it hadn't in years. It was wrong, and I knew it. But knowing didn't change the fact that I felt it. I spent the day trying to lose myself in the routine. Grocery shopping, laundry, cleaning the house. I filled my time with tasks that didn't require thinking. But no matter what I did, there was always a moment, a flicker, when I'd catch myself staring out the window or gripping the edge of the counter, lost in thoughts I shouldn't have been entertaining. By the afternoon, I convinced myself that I had control over it. It was just a message. One inappropriate comment that didn't mean anything in the grand scheme of things. I wouldn't respond. I wouldn't let it affect me. But then my husband came home. He tossed his keys on the counter, loosened his tie, and mentioned in passing that he'd seen his best friend at lunch. Said he looked tired, that he seemed distracted. It was a small comment, a throwaway observation, but it landed in my chest like a weight. Did he know? Had he sensed something? Was it written on my face? I forced myself to smile, to nod, to pretend that I was hearing this as just another piece of information in a normal conversation. But for the rest of the evening, I felt like I was walking on a tightrope. Every glance, every pause, every silence between us felt heavier than it should have. That night, as I lay in bed beside my husband, staring at the ceiling, I realized that no matter how hard I tried to push it away, the thought of him, of my husband's best friend, was still there, lingering in the corners of my mind. I reached for my phone, scrolling aimlessly, trying to distract myself. My thumb hovered over his name, and for a brief second, I imagined what it would feel like to send a message, to see his name light up on the screen. I didn't do it, but the fact that I almost did was enough to terrify me. The next morning, I went about my routine with forced normalcy. Coffee, breakfast, a to-do list that I followed to the letter just to keep my mind busy. And then, as I was leaving the store, I saw him. He was standing by his car, phone in hand, looking directly at me. My heart stuttered in my chest. I could have turned away, walked in the opposite direction, pretended not to see him. But instead, I hesitated. That hesitation was everything. It was permission. His gaze held mine for a second too long, his expression unreadable but charged with something unspoken. There was no accidental nature to this meeting. He had been waiting. For me. I felt my pulse quicken, my hands gripping the bag of groceries just a little tighter. I told myself to leave, that there was nothing here for me, nothing good that could come from this moment. But then he smirked. Just barely, just enough for me to notice. And something inside me shifted. I walked past him without a word, my steps steady, my face carefully composed. But even as I climbed into my car, even as I pulled out of the parking lot, I could still feel his gaze on me. And the worst part? I liked it. I didn't know what was happening to me, or why a single message, a single look, had managed to shake something loose inside me. But as I drove home, hands gripping the wheel too tightly, I realized something that scared me more than anything else. It wasn't just him. It was me. I had spent years thinking I was untouchable, that my life was settled, safe, predictable. But now, for the first time in years, I felt something new, something reckless and alive. And I wasn't sure if I wanted to stop. I told myself that it was over, that the moment in the parking lot meant nothing, that I had imagined the weight of his gaze, the electricity humming beneath my skin. I told myself that I had walked away, and that was the end of it. But I was lying. The truth was, something had shifted inside me, something irreversible. I felt it in the way my mind kept drifting back to him, the way my heart sped up at the thought of seeing him again. It was a quiet, burning thing, growing stronger with every attempt to smother it. And then the invitation came, a casual dinner at our house. Just like always. My husband's idea, not mine. He had no idea what he was setting into motion. To him, it was just another evening with his best friend, a comfortable routine that had existed for years. For me, it was something else entirely. The night of the dinner, I moved through the house like I was sleepwalking. My hands set the table, poured the drinks, arranged the food, all on autopilot. On the surface, I was the perfect hostess, the devoted wife, playing my role flawlessly. But underneath, my nerves were raw. My pulse was too quick. And then the doorbell rang. I took a breath before answering, told myself to be normal, to be the person I was before all of this started. But when I opened the door and he stepped inside, I knew it was already too late. He looked at me like he knew everything, like he had been waiting for this just as much as I had. And that terrified me. The evening passed in a blur of laughter and conversation. To anyone watching, we were just three people sharing a meal. Nothing unusual, nothing out of place. But beneath the surface, it was anything but normal. I felt it every time our eyes met across the table. The way he watched me when he thought no one was looking. The way his fingers brushed against mine for just a second too long when I passed him a glass. It was dangerous, this game we were playing. And then it happened. Later that night, after the food had been cleared and my husband had stepped outside to take a phone call, we were left alone in the kitchen. The air between us shifted instantly, charged with something unspoken, something inevitable. I should have walked away. Instead, I turned to face him, my heart hammering so hard I was sure he could hear it. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then, slowly, deliberately, he reached out, his fingers grazing the inside of my wrist. Just a light touch. Barely there, but it was enough. Before I could think, before I could stop myself, I was leaning in. And then his lips were on mine. It was brief. A second, maybe two. A whisper of a moment. But it was enough to break something inside me. Because in that instant, I knew there was no turning back. When we pulled away, reality came crashing down. My breath was uneven, my mind racing. I didn't have time to process what had just happened before the back door opened and my husband stepped inside, completely unaware of what had just transpired in his own home. I turned away quickly, pretending to adjust something on the counter, willing my hands to stop shaking. But I could still feel it. The press of his lips, the heat of his touch, and worst of all, the unbearable truth settling in my chest. I wanted more. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the darkness pressing down on me like a heavy weight. My husband was beside me, his breathing slow and steady, completely unaware of the chaos unraveling inside me. I had crossed a line, and there was no pretending otherwise. The taste of the moment still lingered, his touch burned into my skin like a brand. I could still hear my own heartbeat, feel the heat that had risen in my chest the second his lips met mine. But more than anything, I could feel the silence. It stretched between us, thick and suffocating. The kind of silence that wasn't empty, but full of something forbidden, something that had always been beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to rise. And now it had. I turned onto my side, away from my husband, curling into myself as if I could physically push the thoughts away. I had to stop this before it got worse. But hadn't it already gone too far? The moment in the kitchen hadn't been an accident. It wasn't a mistake in the way that people like to pretend. It was a choice. A decision made in a fraction of a second, but still a decision. And the worst part? I had wanted it. Not just in the moment, not just in the heat of the night, but long before that. Maybe it had started with the message. Maybe even before that. I squeezed my eyes shut, my fingers gripping the blanket as guilt settled deep in my stomach. My husband had no idea. He had kissed me goodnight as if nothing had changed, as if I was still the same woman he had always trusted. But I wasn't. I could never be again. The next morning, I went through the motions. Breakfast, small talk, a forced smile that felt foreign on my face. My husband was oblivious, and I should have been relieved. But instead, it only made me feel worse. He kissed my forehead before leaving for work, and I felt myself stiffen under his touch. He didn't notice. Or maybe he did, but chose not to question it. The moment the door shut behind him, I exhaled, pressing my hands against the counter to steady myself. My thoughts were a tangled mess, looping over and over, replaying the night before like a film reel stuck on repeat. I needed clarity. I needed to convince myself that it was nothing. But when my phone buzzed and I saw his name flash across the screen, I knew I was lying to myself. A single message. Nothing elaborate, nothing dramatic. Just 3 words. We need to talk. My hands trembled as I stared at it. I should have ignored it. Instead, my fingers moved before my mind could stop them. Where? The response came almost instantly. Same place. Today. A choice. Again. And this time, I didn't hesitate. The coffee shop was quiet when I arrived, the afternoon lull settling over the space like a soft hum. I spotted him immediately, sitting in the corner, fingers wrapped around a cup, gaze locked onto the table as if deep in thought. I almost turned around. Almost walked away and convinced myself that none of this had ever happened. But then he looked up, and I sat down. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. I could feel the tension between us, heavy and charged, the weight of what had happened still lingering in the air. Finally, he exhaled, rubbing a hand over his jaw. "We can't do this," he said. It should have been a relief to hear him say it. It should have been exactly what I wanted. But instead, it felt like a challenge. Because if that were true, neither of us would be sitting here. I took a slow breath, choosing my words carefully. "Then why are we—" He didn't answer right away. Instead, his gaze locked onto mine, and in that second, I knew the truth. Neither of us was ready to let this go. Neither of us wanted to. And that was the most dangerous part of all. I couldn't stop thinking about the coffee shop, the quiet between us, the way his words hung in the air, unspoken but understood. Neither of us had said what was really on our minds, but the moment was charged with an undeniable truth. We both wanted this. It wasn't just about the kiss anymore. It wasn't just about that fleeting touch or the lingering glances. It was about something deeper, something that had taken root without either of us noticing. I had convinced myself that it was a one-time slip, an impulsive mistake. But now, looking back at that conversation, I realized something had shifted. The attraction wasn't just physical anymore. It was emotional, too. A connection that neither of us had expected, a thread that had woven itself between us, pulling tighter with every passing day. I should have stopped. I should have backed away before things went any further. But I didn't. The temptation was too strong, too consuming. I could feel it every time he was near, every time our eyes met across a room, every time he sent me a text or a message that made my heart skip. And the worst part? I liked it. I had spent so many years in a safe, predictable marriage, and now, in a few weeks, everything was unraveling. I was no longer the woman who played by the rules. I was someone else entirely. Someone who couldn't resist the pull of something forbidden. And each time we crossed a line, each time we pushed a little further, I could feel myself losing control. The days passed in a blur, a cycle of guilt and desire that I couldn't break. I spent time with my husband, pretending to be the same wife he had always known. I smiled, I laughed, I did the things I was supposed to do. But beneath the surface, I was somewhere else. I felt the weight of the secret pressing down on me, the constant tension in my chest that wouldn't let me breathe. I had never been a good liar, and yet I found myself lying every day. I lied to my husband, to myself, to everyone around me. And then there was him, the friend who had crossed the line, who had planted this seed inside me and now refused to let it grow. We talked in secret, met in private places, always keeping up the appearance of normalcy on the outside. But every time we were alone, the air thickened with the possibility of what might happen. We both knew the danger. We both knew the consequences. But the fear was just as intoxicating as the desire. I found myself thinking about him more and more, wondering what it would be like to let go, to let the consequences happen, to finally admit what had been building between us for weeks. Every time we saw each other, the tension was unbearable. There was always that silent question hanging in the air. Could we keep going? Could we continue this and walk away unscathed? But each time I was with him, I knew I was lying to myself again. This wasn't just about physical attraction. It wasn't about the thrill of doing something forbidden. It was about something deeper, something I wasn't ready to face, something I wasn't willing to admit. It was a Friday evening when it happened. My husband had planned a quiet night in, just the two of us. He'd ordered our favorite takeout, and we were supposed to relax, unwind after a busy week. But I couldn't focus. I couldn't concentrate on anything. The weight of the secret was too much, too all-encompassing. I told him I was going to take a walk just to clear my head. He didn't question me. He never did. As I stepped out into the cool night air, I felt a strange sense of freedom. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. The weight of everything I had been hiding was still there, but it didn't feel as suffocating. For a moment, I felt like I had control over my own life. But that illusion didn't last long. I turned a corner and saw him standing there. He wasn't expecting me. Not exactly. But when he saw me, he didn't hesitate. Without a word, he stepped forward, and before I could even think, his lips were on mine again. I could have pulled away. I could have stopped it. But I didn't. In that moment, I didn't want to. For a long time, I had lived in a world of certainty, where everything made sense, where everything was in its place. But now, standing there in the dark with him, I realized that I was changing. And I wasn't sure I wanted to stop. I had crossed a line and there was no going back. The kiss that night should have been the final line drawn. The boundary I had promised myself would not be crossed again. But it wasn't. It wasn't even close. I woke the next morning with the heaviness of what had happened still pressing on my chest. The kiss was not some passing moment. It was a sign of something far more complicated than I had ever anticipated. The silence of the previous days, the weight of the secret between us, had felt suffocating. Now, it was almost suffocating in a different way. It was filled with anticipation, dread, and a kind of excitement that I wasn't sure I could ignore anymore. As I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, brushing my hair, I saw myself. This woman I barely recognized anymore. The reflection staring back at me was one of someone who had lost control, someone who had given in to something she had promised herself she would never indulge in. I felt disconnected from the version of me that had once been content in the safety of her life. Now, I felt like I was teetering on the edge of something I wasn't sure I could stop. I tried to focus on the mundane things, getting dressed, preparing breakfast, moving through my routine, but it was all a blur. My thoughts kept circling back to him, to the kiss. I had always told myself that I wasn't the type of person to let things get out of hand. I was the reliable one, the steady one, the wife. But now, what was I? I was a woman lost in her own desires, and the boundaries that once seemed so clear now felt like they were made of smoke, dissipating every time I tried to hold on to them. My husband had no idea, and he would never suspect. He was still the same man he had always been. Trusting, loving, unaware of the storm swirling just beneath the surface. I could see the concern in his eyes when I wasn't quite myself, but he never questioned me. It made the guilt worse. It made me feel like I was living two different lives. One life, the life I had promised to live with him. Simple, predictable, safe. The other, something I hadn't even known I was capable of, complicated, messy, and undeniably real. It was in the quiet moments that I found myself struggling the most. The moments when I was alone with my thoughts, when there was no one to distract me. It was during those times that I remembered the touch of his hand, the way it had felt to be held by someone who wasn't my husband. It wasn't just the physical sensation of it. It was the intensity, the feeling of being seen in a way that I hadn't felt in years. It made me question everything. And then, of course, there were the moments that came after. The stolen glances, the secret messages, the fleeting touches when no one else was watching. Each one was a reminder that this was something we couldn't undo. It was a choice we had made together, a choice that, no matter how much I might have tried to justify it, had changed everything. It was a few days later when I found myself alone with him again. My husband was out of town for work, and the house was eerily quiet. I had convinced myself that I would take the time to clear my head, to regain some sense of balance. But instead, my mind kept drifting back to the decision I had been trying so hard to avoid. When the knock on the door came, I couldn't ignore it. There he was, standing in front of me, his presence both comforting and unsettling. His eyes searched mine, as if he were waiting for me to say something, but I couldn't find the words. I hadn't planned this. I hadn't prepared for this moment. But here it was, standing in front of me, staring me down with a question that I knew I couldn't answer. "I shouldn't be here," he said quietly, his voice thick with unspoken things. But the look in his eyes said it all. It was too late for second thoughts. I stepped aside without thinking, without questioning why I was doing it, and he walked into the house. It wasn't that I didn't feel the weight of the decision I was making. I felt it in every step, every breath, every beat of my heart. But I couldn't stop. I didn't want to stop. And so we stood there in the middle of my home, neither of us saying a word. The air between us was thick with everything we had been avoiding, and yet it felt inevitable. He reached out first, his hand brushing against my arm, and it was enough. It was enough for me to lose whatever restraint I had left. His lips found mine again, and the kiss wasn't a simple thing this time. It was an affirmation. It was a surrender. And when we finally pulled away, there was nothing left to say. We both knew what was happening, and we both knew we couldn't turn back. After that moment, I couldn't pretend anymore. The lines had been blurred beyond recognition, and whatever path I had been walking on was now leading me down a road I wasn't sure I could return from. My heart was heavy with the realization that I had made a choice that no one else could undo. The danger of it, the thrill of it, was intoxicating. But I also knew that it came with consequences. It was a choice I would have to live with. A choice that, at some point, I would have to face. But right now, in this moment, all I could think about was how I felt in his arms. How everything else, everything that had once seemed so important, faded away when he was near. And even as the guilt clawed at my conscience, even as I knew that what I was doing was wrong, there was a part of me that didn't care anymore. I had crossed a line. And there was no going back. The days after that moment were nothing short of chaotic. A quiet storm raged inside me, the tension between what I had done and the life I had promised to protect growing heavier with every passing hour. I moved through my days like a person lost, disconnected from the routine that had once anchored me. The mornings were the hardest, waking up beside my husband, hearing the familiar rhythm of his breath, knowing that he trusted me completely while I was already so far gone. Every glance from him felt like a reminder of the woman I used to be, someone who had believed in loyalty, in honesty, in the vows I had taken. But now, every word, every look seemed laced with guilt. I couldn't escape it. I couldn't stop myself from replaying that night over and over, remembering the heat of his touch, the pull of something I didn't know I was capable of. I tried to focus on the small things. I did the laundry, prepared meals, sat through conversations that barely registered in my mind. But everything felt like a facade, like I was wearing a mask that wasn't quite fitting anymore. And then there was the other side, the side I couldn't ignore. Every time he texted, every time he called, I could feel the temptation pulling at me like an invisible thread. I told myself I wouldn't respond, that I wouldn't let myself fall into the same pattern again. But my fingers betrayed me, typing out responses before my mind could even catch up. It wasn't just about desire anymore. It wasn't even just about the kiss or the touch. It was about the fact that I wanted to be seen, in a way that had nothing to do with the role I had been playing for so long. With him, I felt alive. For the first time in years, I felt wanted, and not just in the way my husband had always wanted me. There was a depth to it, a dangerous kind of attention that I couldn't ignore, no matter how much I tried to convince myself otherwise. My husband had no idea, of course. He had no idea that every time he smiled at me, I felt the weight of a secret that was slowly consuming me. He didn't know that when I kissed him goodnight, I was thinking of someone else. He didn't know that the life we had built together, the one I had once thought was perfect, was slowly unraveling because of choices I couldn't undo. I felt like a fraud, wearing the mask of a loving wife while secretly betraying everything that mattered to me. The weekends were always the hardest. My husband loved to spend time with me, and I loved him in the way that you love someone who has been there for you, who knows all your quirks and your habits, who has shared a life with you. But when he was around, I couldn't stop thinking about him, the other man who had become a shadow in my life. I tried to avoid him, telling myself it was better this way. I needed to distance myself from the chaos I had created, but the pull was undeniable. The moment I let myself be alone, the silence would settle in, and I would feel it. The emptiness, the longing, the need for something I didn't know how to explain. So, when my husband left for a quick trip for work, the house suddenly felt too quiet. The weight of the secret settled over me like a thick blanket, suffocating and unavoidable. I tried to distract myself. I went to the store, I cleaned, I went for a walk. But no matter how far I went, the thought of him was always there, creeping in at the edges of my mind. And then, out of nowhere, a message flashed on my phone. "We need to talk." I almost didn't open it. I almost convinced myself that I had nothing more to say. But when I read those words, I knew. I knew it wasn't a question anymore. It wasn't a choice. It was inevitable. I was already walking down this path. There was no stopping it now. I messaged him back. "When?" The response came quickly. "Tonight. You know where." I arrived at the usual spot, a quiet park near the outskirts of town. It was familiar to us, a place where no one would recognize us, a place where we could be free of the world for a while. I parked the car and sat for a moment, staring at the empty space before me. I wasn't sure what was going to happen next. I wasn't sure if I was ready for whatever came next, but I had no other choice. I had already made my decision. When he arrived, there was no hesitation, no words needed. He walked up to the car, and we both knew what was about to happen. We didn't speak. There was no point. The air between us was thick with everything we had both been hiding, and in that silence, we understood each other completely. He opened the door, and I stepped out, feeling the familiar weight of his gaze on me. The same gaze that had once felt so uncomfortable now felt like something I had been craving. The kiss was not the same as before. It was not a simple brush of lips. It was deeper, more intense. It was a culmination of everything we had been avoiding. It was an admission of what we both knew, that we could never go back. When we pulled away, I could see it in his eyes, that same knowing, that same recognition of the choice we had made. And I understood it too. There was no turning back. Not now. It was at that moment that I realized the full weight of what I had done. The life I had once known was slipping away, piece by piece, and I was standing in the middle of it, unable to stop the tide. I had crossed the line, and there was no going back, no way to undo what had been set in motion. But even as the guilt crept in, there was another part of me, a darker part, that was still drawn to him, still yearning for the connection we shared. And I couldn't help but wonder if I would ever be able to escape it. I had made my choice. And now I would have to live with it. The days after that night felt like a blur, each one blending into the next, an indistinct line of moments tied together by guilt and desire. I returned to the motions of my life, as if everything was the same. I kissed my husband goodbye each morning, prepared meals, kept up the facade of the perfect wife. But beneath it all, I felt like a stranger to myself. The distance between the life I had lived before and the one I was living now had grown too wide to ignore. Every interaction with my husband felt tainted, as if the words we exchanged were empty, hollow. I saw the love in his eyes, the trust he had in me, and it made everything worse. The guilt gnawed at me, yet the pull toward the other man, the one who had become an undeniable force in my life, was stronger than ever. I had crossed a line I didn't even know was there, and now I was living in the aftermath, knowing that nothing would ever be the same. The moments between us, my husband and me, became more and more disconnected. I couldn't look at him without seeing the truth in my mind. The truth that I had betrayed him. I couldn't touch him without feeling the weight of what I had done, the secret that was suffocating me. And yet, when I was with him, when I was pretending to be the woman I used to be, it felt like I was drowning in the lie. But then there were the moments when I was with him. The man who had become my weakness. The man who had stirred something deep inside me that I couldn't ignore. Every time we met, every time I saw him, that part of me, the part that craved this secrecy, this forbidden desire, grew stronger. It was an intoxicating feeling, and I couldn't stop. I told myself I wouldn't see him again, that I would put an end to this. But every time I tried to break away, the temptation drew me back in. The pull of that moment, the way he looked at me, the way we had been together, it was impossible to ignore. It was a dark dance that neither of us had planned, but both of us had willingly stepped into. Each stolen glance, each secret text message, each brief meeting in the quiet of the night, it all added to the intensity of the connection we shared. I didn't know what it was anymore, but I knew it was more than just physical. It was something that consumed me, something that made me feel alive in ways I hadn't known I needed. And yet, with every step forward, I could feel myself slipping further away from the life I had known. The life with my husband, the life that had once been simple and safe, was slipping away like sand through my fingers. There was no way to go back. I couldn't undo what I had done, and the thought of facing the consequences terrified me. But even more terrifying was the realization that I didn't want to. I couldn't stop myself from seeking him out again. I knew it was wrong. I knew that every time we met, every time we spoke, I was sealing my fate. But in those moments, it felt like I was in control, like I was making a choice that mattered to me, even if it came with inevitable consequences. I was no longer the woman I had been. I had become something else, something unrecognizable, and yet something I couldn't escape. The decision to meet him again was one I made out of desperation, out of a need to confront what had been building between us. I was no longer satisfied with the secrecy, with the stolen moments. I wanted more. I had to know what it was, what this connection between us really meant. I couldn't live in the shadows anymore. I needed to see the truth in the light of day. And so, we met again. I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know if this was the moment when everything would fall apart, when I would finally face the consequences of my actions. But I knew I couldn't stop myself. I walked into that meeting, fully aware of the danger, fully aware of the consequences, but unable to walk away. When I saw him, it was as if time stopped. The way he looked at me, like he knew everything, like he could see into the very depths of my soul, made everything else fade away. In that moment, there was no husband, no life I had left behind. There was only us, and whatever this thing was that had grown between us. The connection was undeniable. I couldn't deny it, and neither could he. The chemistry between us was magnetic, impossible to ignore. I could see it in his eyes, feel it in the way his hand brushed against mine. I couldn't speak, couldn't find the words to express what I was feeling. It wasn't just desire. It was something deeper, something more primal. It was a need, a hunger that was impossible to explain. But as much as I wanted to give into it, as much as I wanted to let go and let this thing between us consume me, I couldn't ignore the reality of what it meant. I couldn't ignore the life I had built, the husband who trusted me. I couldn't ignore the consequences of what I had already done. But that didn't stop me. And so, we did it again. We crossed the line, and this time there was no going back. And the truth settled in, heavier than ever before. There was no escape now. There was no undoing the choices I had made. I had chosen this. I had chosen him, and in doing so, I had chosen to lose everything else. The consequences would come. I knew that. But for now, in this moment, there was only the feeling of being wanted, of being seen in a way I hadn't been in years. and I couldn't stop myself from wanting more. I couldn't ignore it any longer. The consequences of my actions were closing in, and no matter how much I tried to hide from them, they were always just a step behind, ready to catch up with me. Every time I kissed my husband, I felt the weight of the secret pressing down on me. Every touch, every smile felt hollow because I knew I wasn't being honest. Not with him, and not with myself. The night before, when I had crossed the line again with him, something shifted inside me. I didn't feel the same rush of desire I had felt the first few times we'd been together in secret. Instead, I felt empty. The high had faded, leaving only the stark reality of what I had become. I could still feel his touch, still taste the kiss on my lips, but it was no longer the same. The once exhilarating secret had turned into a burden, a weight I wasn't sure I could bear any longer. It wasn't just the act itself. It wasn't just the physicality of it all. It was the way I had allowed myself to drift further and further from everything I had known. The woman who had once been so certain of her path was now lost, consumed by something she didn't fully understand. The desire to be seen, the hunger to feel alive in ways that had nothing to do with my marriage. Those things had led me down a road I could no longer walk back from. But the hardest part was facing my husband. I couldn't look at him without feeling the weight of my betrayal. Every time he asked me about my day, every time he smiled at me with that same trust, it felt like I was drowning. I felt like I was slowly suffocating under the weight of my own guilt. I had become a stranger to him, and I hated it. I hated myself for doing this to him, but at the same time, there was a part of me that couldn't stop. The tension in our home was palpable. He noticed it, of course. He wasn't blind, but he didn't know why I had pulled away, why I had become distant. He couldn't have known. He didn't know about him, the other man. The man who had taken something from me that I couldn't get back. The man who had awakened a side of me I didn't know existed. A side that craved excitement, passion, and danger. But the danger was real, and I knew it. I knew that if I didn't stop this, everything would fall apart. I couldn't keep living this double life. I couldn't keep pretending to be the devoted wife while secretly betraying everything that I had promised. The lies had become too many. The guilt was too heavy. And yet, every time I thought about cutting it off, I felt a deep, aching void inside me. It wasn't just about him. It was about me, about who I had become. I tried to distract myself. I buried myself in work, spent more time with friends, anything to avoid being alone with my thoughts. But every time I was left alone, it all came rushing back. The guilt, the desire, the inevitable truth that I couldn't outrun. I could hear his voice in my head, see his face when I closed my eyes, and I couldn't escape it. That evening, I sat across from my husband at dinner, trying to look normal, trying to seem like the woman he thought I was. But inside, I was anything but. I could feel the tension building between us, and I knew it wasn't just in my own mind. He felt it too. He couldn't understand why I had become so distant, so cold. But I couldn't explain. I couldn't tell him the truth, even if I wanted to. He reached out to touch my hand, and for a moment I felt like I might crumble under the weight of his concern. His eyes held so much trust, so much love, and it was suffocating. I wanted to pull away. I wanted to tell him the truth, to come clean. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, I smiled weakly, pretending everything was fine, pretending that I hadn't just ruined everything. Later that night, after he had gone to bed, I stood in front of the mirror, staring at my reflection. I didn't recognize the woman staring back at me. The woman who had once been so sure of who she was, of what she wanted. Now, I was lost. I had given in to a temptation that had consumed me, and I didn't know how to stop. I thought about him again. The other man. The man who had changed everything. The man who had taken what I didn't know I could give. I thought about the way he looked at me, the way he made me feel like I was something more than just a wife, something more than just the person I had become. But it wasn't worth it. It wasn't worth the destruction I had caused. It wasn't worth the loss. I knew I had to make a choice. I couldn't keep living like this. I couldn't keep hurting my husband, the one person who had trusted me more than anyone else. But I also couldn't ignore the pull, the craving that had been ignited within me. The life I had once known seemed like a distant memory now, and I wasn't sure how to get it back. But I had to try. For him. For us. I couldn't continue down this path, knowing it would only end in devastation. It was time to face the consequences of my actions. It was time to stop living in the lies, in the illusion of control. I had made my choices, and now I had to live with them. The question was, could I?